Welcome to Chapter 6, Religion and Ethnicity, a Complex Relationship. So this chapter is one of the richest in the textbook. It weaves together our immigration history, racial and ethnic identity, religious pluralism, and the sociology of assimilation into a single sustained argument about what it means to be American. The central insight of the chapter, religion and ethnicity, are not simply parallel features of social life, they are mutually constitutive. Each shapes the other in a continuous feedback loop that varies across groups, historical periods, and social conditions. As Christiano, Kivisto, and Swatos emphasize throughout the United States, is an immigrant settler nation. And understanding American religion requires understanding immigration. Before diving into the lecture, reflect on your own ethnic and religious backgrounds. Do you know your ethnic heritage? Can you trace your family's country of origin? If you are not indigenous, from what country did your family come from and when? Some people came here involuntarily and had the privilege of knowing the routes taken from them. How does this affect identity? Does your family still celebrate its ethnic heritage in any way? Food, language, holidays, religious practices? This chapter covers a lot of ground, and so here is what we will move through. The reciprocal relationship between religion and ethnicity. What are ethnic, nationality, and racial groups? 4 relational patterns between religion and ethnicity. Ethnicity and the religious empire, or the righteous empire, the Protestant foundation of the U.S. Catholics in America, the Irish, Italian, and Polish experiences. The Jewish diaspora in the United States, 3 waves and 3 movements. And Herberg's triple melting pot thesis and twilight of ethnicity. The African American religious experience, slavery, freedom, and the Black church. The new immigrants, post-1965 arrivals, and the transformation of American religion. Also, beyond Protestant, Catholic, and Jewish, Muslims, Hindus, and Buddhists. The United States is perhaps the most ethnically and religiously diverse large nation in the world. This diversity shapes and is shaped by ongoing struggles over what it means to be American. Our text makes 2 foundational points. Religious identities are often intimately connected to ethnic, racial, and national identities, and in many cases they are mutually reinforcing. Religion is one of our most significant boundary-defining markers. It defines who is us and who is them, both within and between groups. There are examples of the religion-ethnicity link, such as Scandinavian immigrants and Lutheranism, Eastern Orthodox church bodies named after national origins, Russian, Greek, Serbian, Hindus in the U.S. predominantly tracing roots to India. But the reverse is also true. The African American experience has profoundly shaped religious expressions. In prophetic Christian denominations, Black Pentecostalism, and the Nation of Islam. And among Catholics, differences in church attendance and spirituality vary by whether the congregation is Italian, Irish, Polish, or Mexican. The poem The New Colossus by Emma Lazarus, engraved on the Statue of Liberty, captures the American ideal. Give me your tired, your poor, your huddled masses yearning to be breathed free. But as this chapter reveals, the reality has always been more complicated. Before analyzing the religion-ethnicity relationship, our text established clear working definitions. Weber set the stage for this discussion in Economy and Society, arguing that ethnic categories are historically fluid and socially constructed, not biological givens. E.K. Francis identified ethnic groups as a subtype of Gemeinschaft groups, groups whose identity is based on emotional rather than functional ties, bearing resemblance to kinship groups. So the key features are involuntary nature. People are born into ethnic groups. There's an emotional bond. It links individuals to others in the group, even strangers. The Harvard Encyclopedia of American Ethnic Groups identified 14 criteria that characterize ethnic groups, including common geographic origin, migratory status, race, language or dialect, religious faith, traditions and symbols, food preferences, settlement and employment patterns, political interest, internal sense of distinctiveness, and external perception of distinctiveness. Not every ethnic group shares all 14 criteria. What makes a group ethnic is a particular combination of these attributes in a specific historical and social context. For the purposes of this chapter, our text uses the following working definitions. Ethnic groups are composed of people who are presumed by members of the group itself and by outsiders to have a shared collective origin and history, as well as a common set of cultural attributes that serves to establish boundaries between the group and the larger society. This definition has two important components. The objective component is shared cultural attributes, common history, and collective origin. The subjective component is the group members themselves and outsiders perceive and act on these shared characteristics. Rogers Brubaker in 2004 offers a more skeptical approach, ethnicity without groups, arguing that ethnic groups are often treated as natural givens rather than social constructs. This is a useful caution. Ethnic categories are meaningful in particular context, not universal or permanent. How do nationality groups differ from ethnic groups? The key distinction between these involves territory and political agenda. Nationality groups, their sense of peoplehood is shaped by a political agenda calling for the creation, reconstitution, or preservation of a nation-state. Their identity involves territorial claims and ideological nationalism. Two contrasting models of nationalism exist. Ethnic nationalism, such as Germany. Identity and citizenship rooted in blood and soil. People of German ancestry who lived in Russia for 200 years are eligible for citizenship. Turkish guest workers who live in Germany for decades are outsiders. There's civic nationalism, France and ideally the U.S. Anyone willing to embrace the nation's political and cultural values can become a citizen. Historically, the U.S. is closer to civic nationalism, but within but with persistent challenges from ethnic nationalists, from the KKK's anti-Catholic, anti-immigrant campaigns of the 1920s to the racially exclusionary politics visible in recent elections. National minorities in the U.S., American Indians, Native peoples, are the only group with genuine territorial claims from prior habitation. The Nation of Islam and Marcus Garvey's Back to Africa movement represent rare examples of nationalistic movements within U.S. ethnic communities. Race is one of the most contested and consequential concepts in social science. Three competing positions on the relationship between race and ethnicity are: race and ethnicity are fundamentally different concepts, they are basically synonymous, or race is a subset of ethnicity. This is the position our textbook finds most persuasive. In the 19th and early 20th century, race science claimed to categorize populations by physical differences as indicators of intelligence, personality, and moral character. But no consensus emerged on even the number of races. Different scientists counted 3, 4, or 5. This was terrible science with disastrous consequences. The eugenics movement, immigration restrictions, and the justification of slavery and colonialism. By the 1920s, anthropologists Frank Boas and Ruth Benedict led the charge to discredit biological notions of race. The social sciences since then have largely abandoned biological explanations in favor of cultural and social historical ones. The Human Genome Project and genetic ancestry tests have revived concerns about biological determinism. Richard Herrnstein's and Charles Murray's The Bell Curve, 1994, attempted to reintroduce genetic explanations for group differences in IQ, and it was overwhelmingly rejected by the scientific community. Our text preferred approach is borrowing from Moroska. They use the term racialized ethnicity for groups like African Americans for whom race looms large in articulating ethnic identity. Harold Abersom and Philip Hammond and Key Warner identified 4 variations in how religion and ethnicity relate to each other. Kivisto has further refined these types. Ethnic fusion. Ethnicity is the major foundation of religion. The examples are the Amish and the Hutterites. These are Germanic sectarians who have remained aloof from mainstream society. Hasidic Jews, the Nation of Islam. Religion and ethnicity are virtually inseparable. You cannot be one without the other. Their ethnic religion, the link between religion and ethnicity is pronounced but not total. Dutch Reform, Greek Orthodox, the Church of England, Serbia Orthodox, Scottish Presbyterians, ethnic identity can be claimed without the religious identity, but not the reverse. In religious ethnicity, the most common pattern in the U.S., multiple ethnic groups share the same religion. For example, in Lutheranism, Swedish, Norwegian, Danish, Finnish, German origins. Catholicism is Irish, Polish, Italian, Mexican, Filipino. Islam is Indian, Pakistan, Syrian, Lebanese, Iranian, and Iraqi origins. But religion extends beyond our ethnicity. And ethnic autonomy. It's when religion plays a minimal or marginal role in defining ethnic identity. This is the least common pattern. Example, the Roma. Note that Abrahams' placement of Native Americans here is contested. Anthropological literature suggests they belong at the other end of the spectrum, which is religious fusion. During the formative period of U.S. history, the vast majority of the population was Protestant, and British settlers played a hegemonic role in constructing a white Anglo-Saxon Protestant, or WASP, culture and polity. There were four distinct Protestant groups that shaped the nation's founding and religious character. Puritans from eastern England, these were early Congregationalists. They were religious dissenters who sought freedom from the state church. They were theocrats, intent on fusing religion and politics, and they were unreceptive to religious dissent within their own colonies. The Church of England, Anglicans, or Episcopalians. These were from southern England. They were elitist, traditionalist merchant capitalists who became central to the slaveholding class in Virginia and gave the Church of England a foothold in the colonies. The Society of Friends, or Quakers. These were from English Midlands and Wales. Religious pacifists who settled in Pennsylvania and New Jersey. They promoted egalitarian and democratic ideals. They founded the first anti-slavery society in the Western world. And the Scots-Irish Presbyterians, which settled on the Appalachian frontier. They harbored antipathy toward English domination and formed the basis for the growth of the Presbyterianism in the United States. The first Catholics in the United States were English Catholics. They were small in number, relatively affluent, and subdued in religious expression. They attracted very little hostility. But everything changed with mass Irish Catholic immigration, especially after the Great Famine. The Irish quickly dominated U.S. Catholicism, controlling its hierarchy by the late 19th century. And this created two fronts of conflict. There was external, the against Protestant nativist hostility, the KKK, the American Protection Association, and anti-immigrant legislation. And there was internal Irish dominance with other ethnic Catholic groups, especially Italians and Polish. Italian Catholics versus Irish leadership. The lower level of institutional religiosity, a tradition of anti-clericalism in southern Italy. The Italians feared their children would be hybridized, made Irish in parochial schools. So many chose public schools instead. Polish Catholics versus the Irish leadership. Polish Catholics have high religiosity. In Poland, Catholicism was fused with nationalism as resistance to foreign domination. They built ethnic parishes extensively, from under 20 in 1870 to about 800 in 1930. Reverend Francis Hoder led a dissenting schism that created the Polish National Catholic Church in 1904. The Irish responded to Protestant pressure. They built parochial schools, colleges, and universities, such as Georgetown, Notre Dame, and the Catholic University of America, at great financial cost as bulwarks against forced assimilation. Today, there are more Jews in the United States than in any other country other than Israel. The U.S. Jewish community was built through three major waves of immigration. Wave 1 were the Sephardic Jews in small numbers. The Sephardic Jews trace their origins to Spain and Portugal. They were expelled during the Spanish Inquisition, settled in Holland and England before migrating to North America. Wave 2 were the Ashkenazic Jews from Germany. They arrived in the mid-19th century. They were higher socioeconomic status, and they opted largely for an assimilationist strategy and founded the Reform movement. Wave 3 saw Ashkenazic Jews from Central and Eastern Europe, such as Poland and Russia. This was by far the largest wave, arriving primarily between 1880 and 1924. They were more religiously traditional and fueled the growth of Orthodox and conservative Judaism. The Jewish community was also divided between religious adherents and secularized Jews. Many were attracted to political radicalism. Religious Jews divided into three major denominations. First, the Reform Judaism. They were assimilationists, modernized practice. They sent children to public schools. They found Hebrew Union College in 1875. Orthodox Judaism were anti-accommodationist. They were strict observers of Jewish law, the halakha, founded religious schools, the yeshivot, and the Yeshiva University in 1886. Conservative Judaism, a distinctly American middle position, became the largest branch at one time, serving middle-class non-German Jews. They founded the Jewish Theological Seminary in 1886. There was anti-Semitism in the United States. Our textbook notes it was both more common and more severe than generally acknowledged, especially including quotas at Ivy League schools, restricted housing covenants, and the virulent anti-Semitism of Henry Ford, as well as the KKK. There are three branches of American Judaism. There is the Reform Judaism that did originate among higher status German Jews seeking acceptance in American society. The modernized religious practices eliminated many traditional rituals, including Sunday schools, and it was modeled after Protestant Christianity in style. They founded Hebrew Union College for rabbinical training. They sent children to public schools rather than religious ones. Among Orthodox Judaism, they were anti-accommodationist and were suspicious of rationalism. They were suspicious of rationalism, science, liberalism, and modernism. They observed strict Jewish law, dietary laws, Sabbath observances, and founded religious schools and Yeshiva University. There is a continuum from ultra-traditionalists to moderately traditionalists within Orthodoxy. Conservative Judaism is a distinctly American phenomenon. There is no counterpart in Europe. They have a middle position. They are more traditional than Reform, less strict than Orthodox. They founded the Jewish Theological Seminary. This is the choice of middle-class non-German Jews, and it became the largest branch at its peak. An important note is that anti-Semitism in the U.S. was pervasive and severe. Our texts emphasize that it delayed Jewish incorporation into civic and social life long after barriers for other European groups had crumbled. For the first century plus of American history, the ethnic character of religious institutions was a defining feature. But after World War II, things began to change rapidly. Ruby J. Reeves Kennedy studied intermarriage in New Haven and proposed the triangle melting pot thesis. As ethnic boundaries eroded, marriage patterns regrouped, not by ethnicity, but by three major religious divisions: Protestant, Catholic, and Jewish. Well, Herberg's Protestant, Catholic, Jewish 1955 argument extended Kennedy's argument to claim that religion was replacing ethnicity as the primary social compass. The three religious categories had become the key identities through which Americans located themselves in the social structure. His thesis and his synthesis, the American way of life, was real religion, with Protestantism, Catholicism, and Judaism as three equally legitimate expressions of it. Being religious in America in any of these three ways was the mark of being American. Siri Peach later questioned Kennedy's data. He agreed that ethnic intermarriage was rising, but not convinced that religious division had replaced ethnic ones as the primary determinants of marriage pools. After World War II, multiple forces combined to erode ethnic identity, particularly for European origin groups. There were declining ethnic institutions, so membership in ethnic organizations fell. Ethnic institutions experienced declining membership as U.S.-born generations opted for mainstream institutions. There was suburbanization. Younger generations left ethnic urban enclaves for the suburbs. This physically dispersed ethnic communities. Loyalty to the homeland language declined by the third generation. The old country language was typically lost. What replaced ethnic culture as the primary cultural framework for American life was mass culture. Public schools provided a powerful Americanizing force, providing multi-ethnic environments where new friendships and dating patterns transcended ethnic boundaries. Intermarriage, there was rising rates of ethnic intermarriage, signaling the breakdown of ethnic boundaries. Richard Alba called this the twilight of ethnicity. Herbert Gans later called it the coming darkness of late generation European American ethnicity. Mary Waters, in 1990, argued that a thin symbolic ethnicity may persist for some time, ethnic identity persisting as a voluntary individual choice with few behavioral consequences, but race, not religion, is the most salient boundary. European Americans are simply considered white Americans. The central conclusion of this section, the major implication of the twilight of ethnicity for the religions of distinct European groups, is that for most groups, the cables connecting ethnicity to religion have either been severed or have become seriously frayed. There are two illustrative examples from the Evangelical Lutheran Church in America, the ELCA. There was a resistance to full communion within the Episcopal Church. When it was first put to a vote, it failed to get the two-thirds majority required. Underlying theological disputes, many Midwestern Lutherans, heirs of Scandinavian immigrants, still harbor suspicion of bishops, a legacy of their ancestors' battles with state church power in Scandinavia. So ethnicity's ghost lives on. The urban ministry outreach was now actively reaching out to African Americans, Central Americans, Ethiopians, Haitians, Mexican, Puerto Rican, and Sudanese, which is a dramatic shift from the Scandinavian ethnic roots. The historical patterns connecting religion to ethnicity are being rearticulated. It's also worth noting that the Immigration and Naturalization Act of 1924 effectively ended mass immigration for 4 decades, giving existing ethnic communities time to assimilate without continuous replenishment from the homeland. Now we turn to the most significantly racialized ethnic group in U.S. history, the African Americans. African Americans are the most a significant group of involuntary immigrants in U.S. history. Unlike voluntary immigrants, they came with none of the cultural or institutional supports available to newcomers who choose to come. In this process, much of their cultural heritage was lost. It was destroyed due to the enslaved Africans coming from numerous tribes with different languages, religions, and cultural practices. The heterogeneity that made cultural preservation was extremely difficult. The gods of Africa died, and Christianity became the dominant religion. But some aspects of African perspectives survived. Ecstatic experiences and folk beliefs imprinted a distinct character onto African American Christianity from an early date, creating a syncretistic religious expression that blended Protestant Christianity with African religious elements. And there's a key question for the rest of this section. Did African American Christianity function primarily as a tool of oppression, making believers docile, or as a resource for resistance and liberation? Franklin Fraser had the position that Christianity was an invisible institution that promoted an essentially otherworldly religion, serving a compensatory function for a powerless slave community, religion of the oppressed, which made slaves accept their fate. Du Bois offered early support. The slave, losing the joy of this world, eagerly seized upon the offered conceptions of the next. Genovese's counter-argument drew on Gramsci's concept of cultural hegemony. Genovese argued that African American religion was a creative response to oppression, the single most important cultural resource slaves had for articulating resistance. Slave owners tried to use Christianity to make slaves docile and obedient. Slaves instead found a message of freedom and liberation in the same religion. Lincoln and Mamiya's synthesis proposed a dialectical approach. African American religion has always contained a tension between multiple poles: otherworldly versus thisworldly, communal versus privatistic, resistance versus accommodation. This reflects Du Bois' concept of double consciousness. African Americans have never been fully accepted as American, but they are no longer African either. They are permanently suspended between two identities, both of which has been denied, thus reflecting Du Bois' concepts. After emancipation, a wide variety of black religious bodies emerged as the central institutions of the African American community. There are three major denominational streams that have attracted the overwhelming majority. The Baptist denominations are National Baptist Convention, the National Baptist Convention of America, and the Progressive National Baptist Convention. The Methodist denominations of the African Methodist Episcopal Church, the African Methodist Episcopal Zion Church, and the Christian Methodist Episcopal Church. Pentecostal denominations such as Church of God in Christ is by large the largest Pentecostal body with 5.5 million members. Collectively, these church bodies attract approximately 60% of African American population, with approximately 5 to 10% belonging to the Roman Catholic Church. Islam's arrival in the African American community began with the mysterious Wallace D. Fard, who appeared in Detroit in the 1930s and began preaching a message of messianic black nationalism claiming roots in Islam. Fard's message stated, "The black race has been oppressed by whites, the blue-eyed devils." Christianity was part of that oppression. Blacks were the first race and had their culture stolen by white interlopers. Elijah Muhammad, formerly Elijah Poole, after Fard's mysterious disappearance, rose to lead the Nation of Islam. He emphasized economic independence and black separatism. It was a major rejection of mainstream African American integrationism. Malcolm X and boxer Cassius Clay, Muhammad Ali, brought the nation to national prominence. Elijah Muhammad's claim that Fard was Allah incarnate diverged radically from Orthodox Islam. After a pilgrimage to Mecca, Malcolm X renounced Elijah Muhammad's racialist version of Islam in favor of mainstream universalistic Islam. He was assassinated shortly afterwards. After Elijah Muhammad's death, there was a split. Wallace D. Muhammad, his son, founded the American Muslim Mission and moved adherents toward mainstream Sunni Islam. Louis Farrakhan continued the Nation of Islam tradition, added virulent anti-Semitism, organized the Million Man March in 1955, and the nation has been labeled a hate group by the Southern Poverty Law Center. Its future is uncertain, with aging leadership and membership erosion. We now shift from the experiences of the old immigrants, primarily Europeans, to the new immigrants who have arrived since 1965. This transition is one of the most significant demographic and religious transformations in American history. The 1965 Hart-Celler Act reopened immigration after 4 decades of restriction, and the results have been dramatic. The source country shifted from Europe to Latin America, the Caribbean, and Asia. The religious composition of immigrants changed substantially. There were more non-Christian immigrants than ever before. By 2020, a quarter of the U.S. population was composed of immigrants and their children. So what happens to the religion-ethnicity relationship when the immigrants are not European and not Christian? The key moments within the U.S. immigration laws are listed. The story of immigration in the U.S. is a story of legal inclusion and exclusion. There are 3 landmark pieces of legislation that define this history. The Immigration Act of 1924. It implemented a countrywide based national origins quota system, systematically favoring Northern and Western Europeans. It stopped immigration from Asia entirely. It ended mass immigration for the next 4 decades. Ethnic immigration communities were not replenished. It was driven in part by racialist ideology and nativist hostility to Catholic immigrants from Southern and Eastern Europe. The Immigration and Nationality Act of 1952 repealed the last remaining measures excluding immigrants from Asia. It allotted each Asian national a minimum of 100 visas per year. This eliminated laws preventing Asians from becoming naturalized citizens. The Hart-Celler Amendment of 1965 lifted most numerical restrictions on immigration. It abandoned the country-based quota system entirely, and the result is that immigration levels since 1965 have exceeded the peak of 1880 to 1924. Today, most immigrants come from Latin America, the Caribbean, and South and East Asia. Most of today's immigrants come from Latin America, the Caribbean, and South and East Asia. The United States is the #1 destination for Christians, Buddhists, and the unaffiliated. #2 for Hindus, Jews, and other religious groupings. #7 for Muslim and Hispanic Americans now outnumber African Americans as the largest minority group. Also, there is a split between the highly educated professional classes and the relatively uneducated and unskilled. New racial fault lines have begun to emerge. States where immigrants are most highly concentrated include California, New York, New Jersey, and Illinois. They have the heaviest immigration concentrations. The backlash to immigration, visible in the election of 2016 and 2024, has significant religious dimensions. Religion unquestionably factors into debates about who belongs in America. Until recently, about 3/4 of new immigrants were Christian, only slightly less than the general U.S. population. This means the new immigration has largely reinforced rather than overturned character of American religion. For Catholics, This is the big story. The percentage of immigrant Christians who are Catholic, 42%, is nearly double the share of the general population, 22%. Hispanic Americans now constitute about one-third of all Roman Catholics in the United States. There are tensions within Catholicism, as immigrant congregations often lack priests from their own ethnic communities. The tensions resemble those of earlier days: Italians versus Irish, Polish versus Irish. Some new immigrants have switched to Protestant, especially Pentecostal, churches which offer greater congregational autonomy. There is research on new immigrant religions, a rapid growing field. There are some key scholars and studies. Warner and Whitner study a new paradigm for studying immigration. There are also ethnographic studies of Hindu, Korean, Chinese, Iranian, Jewish, Zoroastrian, Evangelical Hispanic, Haitian Catholic, and Rastafarian communities. Some of the new immigrants are Jewish and come from the republics of the former Soviet Union, either directly or indirectly through Israel. Our textbook offers an honest assessment. The research findings to date offer mixed results in assessing the likelihood that religion and ethnicity will continue to be mutually reinforcing in the future and for subsequent generations, or if they will become increasingly dissociated. But based on the preponderance of the evidence, they conclude for most Christian groups, the disjunction between religion and ethnicity is likely. Religion will persist, but lose its specific ethnic character over time. For Jews, the fusion of ethnicity and religion will probably persist over time, given the tight historical and cultural bonds that have survived repeated waves of persecution and assimilation pressure. The transnationalism factor, thanks to improvements in international travel and communication technology, new immigrants can remain bicultural, rooted in both their homeland and receiving national simultaneously. This means religious and cultural boundaries are becoming increasingly disconnected from the political boundaries of nation states. As Peggy Levitt put it, God needs no passport. Race remains the most persistent boundary. Following Mary Waters' argument, for non-European immigrants, racial categorization will likely slow assimilation more than it did for earlier European waves. The most transformative change in the U.S. religious landscape since 1965 is the growth of the non-Abrahamic religions, and three groups deserve special mention. Islam has approximately 3.5 million Muslims in the United States. They are the third largest group after Christians and Jews. Islam was present before the nation's founding. Some enslaved Africans were Muslim. The first mosque was built in Cedar Rapids, Iowa in 1934. Today, there are nearly 3,000 mosques nationwide. There is a heavy concentration in the Midwest, with the largest mosque being the Islamic Center of America in Dearborn, Michigan. Extremely diverse. Immigrants from more than 60 countries, divisions between Sunni and Shia, between ethnic groups, and between immigrant Muslims and native-born black Muslims. Post 9/11 Islamophobia has been a significant challenge. Contrasts between President Bush's initial response, which was tapping down the hostility, and President Trump's travel bans targeting Muslim-majority countries. Most Hindus trace their roots to India. Home shrines have been more important than temples for continuity of practice. There are major temples in Chicago, Houston, and central New Jersey. Buddhism is growing, and its growth relies primarily on immigrants from Southeast Asia, China, and Korea. There's also a non-ethnic Buddhism attracting counterculture and intellectual Americans. Its relationship to immigrant Buddhism remains to be defined. Here are terms and phrases to pay attention to from this chapter. Immigrant settler nation. The U.S. is a nation built on voluntary and involuntary immigration and settlement. Ethnic fusion. Ethnicity is the major founder of religion. Ethnic religion. It's a pronounced link between religion and ethnicity, but not total fusion. Religious ethnicity is multiple ethnic groups sharing the same religion. Ethnic autonomy. Religion plays a minimal role in defining your ethnic identity. Sephardic Jews can trace their origins to Spain and Portugal. They were the first wave of Jewish immigration to the U.S. Ashkenazic Jews, Central and Eastern European Jewish heritage, they dominated the second and third waves of Jewish immigration. Anti-Semitism is prejudice and discrimination against Jews, which is pervasive in U.S. history. The twilight of ethnicity is the coming darkness of late generation European American ethnicity, the erosion of ethnic identity among European origin groups over generations. Compensatory function. Religion is consolation for social deprivation. This is Fraser's view of African American Christianity. The Nation of Islam is the African American Islamic movement with black nationalists Prophet Elijah Muhammad, Malcolm X, and Louis Farrakhan. The new immigrants are post-1965 arrivals, predominantly from Latin America, Caribbean, and Asia. Segmented in assimilation is different immigrant groups assimilate into different strata of American society based on education, skills, and racial classification. If you were in a face-to-face class, the minute paper chapter 6 reflection, you should write 5 to 10 sentences. Is your family religious? Can you tell if the religion that your family practices has ethnic roots? Write 5 to 10 sentences and please turn your work in before leaving class. If you would like to look up any other information, here are the credits. And this concludes our Chapter 6.